Everybody, this is Stream, and today we have a nice little 6-game Major League Baseball slate. It does look like, at least at this point, the Atlanta game will be on the schedule here, even though this is a doubleheader for Atlanta and St. Louis. So keep in mind that they could get removed at some point in the day. But I don't know if they're going to stick on there or not. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this slate. So it is a smaller slate. We do have a lot of 1 cent things today as well, so that's always fun. This slate is rough though for pitchers, especially. There's not much available that is very good on this one. But we'll get into that here. Overall, I do think the bats are going to be popular today, and it's going to be a high-scoring slate, despite the fact that it's a smaller slate. So let's go ahead and get into it today. So let's look at our pitchers first. So Gill is the top overall play. He's got the best K rate on the slate. He's the best pitcher on the slate as well, and he's got some good upside here, despite the fact he had a bad game in his last start. He's been pretty solid lately with 9 good starts in the last 10 games. The Dodgers game and the Baltimore game, really the only 2 games where he struggled at all. And so I think he's in a really solid place here, and he should be able to go, 5+ innings or 6 innings here, get 90-some pitches, and get a decent outcome here for him. Though he is fairly expensive, he doesn't have the highest of ceilings, so to keep that in mind. The other guy that I like is Gavin Stone for the Dodgers. Now, he's also in a risky spot. His K rate is pretty low, though he's not been as consistent as Gill. Though he should be able to get a decent outcome here against the White Sox, who are absolutely abysmal. But he doesn't have the highest of ceiling either, so he's not a must play. But he's definitely a decent play on the slate. Then we'll look at Cutter Crawford as an extreme GPP play. Now, Cutter has a decent match, has a rougher matchup here against Toronto, but his K rate does give him some hope that the matchup isn't super ideal, so he's kind of a contrarian option at best, and he doesn't have the highest of ceilings either. Then we'll look at Bryce Elder for Atlanta. Now, he's really struggled this season in his starts. Now, he went down to the minors for a little while here, and he is now coming back up because this is a doubleheader for this team. If this game is on the slate, he'll be somebody definitely to consider today because he definitely has some potential, as he's had a couple of good games this season against weaker teams. He has had somewhat of a tough schedule pitching wise, and this is one of the easier teams has gone against this season. So he definitely has some upside here, and he's priced fairly. He's definitely an extreme GPP play, but he does have some upside on this one. Looking at Sean Woods Richardson for Minnesota, he is a Hail Mary play today. He's just dirt cheap at $6,900. And he is facing Arizona, who I do like from a batting perspective. But if he manages 6 strikeouts, he could score in the 15 to 20 fantasy point range. Though that is going to be a little bit tougher today than he's had some. He has pitched a pretty rough schedule, and he does manage to keep the earned runs down, but he just has some potential to give up some home runs occasionally. So he is in a risky spot there. Another kind of Hail Mary play is Hayden Birdsong. Now, he's the Giants' best pitching prospect, and he's been really solid in the minors, at least at the Double-A level. He had a 2.05 ERA. The question here is he didn't do so good at Triple-A. And so he is a risky play on the slate, but he's also priced higher than I'd like. But he is one of the better prospects in baseball, and the Cubs are a risky team to stack up today. So he's definitely interesting, at least on the slate. But he does high risk, high reward. But he's somebody you have to consider, especially with the limited options at the pitching today. Let's look at our catchers here. Now, this is where some core players are going to come into play here. So, Danny Jansen is one of my favorite plays on the slate. He has been inconsistent lately, but he does draw home run metrics today, and he's one of the better options at catcher on the slate, especially price-wise. If we look at other options, though, Will Smith is also in play for the Dodgers. Now, he does draw good metrics for the slate. He's high risk, high reward, though, because he is pricey, but he's definitely playable on the slate, especially if you pay down for pitching some, though he's been somewhat inconsistent lately. Another player that you could consider today would be Will Contreras for St. Louis. Now, he's been pretty good lately. He's got a nice 4-game hit streak going. He's got some home run potential, and Elder is a risky pitcher today for the Braves, so I think he has some upside here as kind of a one-off from the team, and he's definitely one of the better options on the slate. The top owned options today will be Will Smith, Christian Vasquez from Minnesota, whoever starts for Atlanta, and Danny Jansen. So I do think that those guys have some potential today as well as value options. Looking at first base, Otani does jump off the page as the top overall play. He had a monster game yesterday with another home run. He's been absolutely insane lately, and he draws really good matchup metrics again today against the White Sox. So I do think he's a great option on the slate. Matt Olson is also very interesting for Atlanta today. He's going to have a favorable matchup here against St. Louis, and so while he has been inconsistent this season, he does draw home run metrics at this point. Vlad Jr. has been hitting the ball very well lately. He's had some monster games after monster games. His price is a little bit cheaper than Olson, so he's a good option off of him, and I think that he'll be a solid play. The top owned plays at this position, Otani, Matt Olson, and Vlad Jr. as well, so the top overall do match up there, and really it's just about price points that what you want there. But some low-owned upside guys are Michael Busch, Horowitz from Milwaukee, and Carlos Santana from Minnesota. Christian Walker also has some upside on the slate as well. Looking at second base here. So Gleyber Torres is the top overall play, and it's not very close here. Now, I didn't make him a core play because he has struggled some, and he is a little bit inconsistent, but he has a good, he does have good metrics for this game, and he's definitely worth a look here, though he's nice and cheap, so he does help you pay up at other positions. But some top owned options here will be Gleyber Torres, Ozzy Albies, and Gavin Lux. But Albies and Lux, they just don't have the metrics today that make them jump off the page. But some low owned upside plays will be Willie Castro, Michael Busch, Horowitz from Milwaukee, and Nico Horner. A lot of those guys also fit in at first base, so it's a good place to potentially utilize some of those guys. Marte, though, also has a little bit of upside for Arizona. Looking at third base, Rafael Devers and Royce Lewis are going to be the top overall plays. Now, Lewis has been absolutely on a heater since he started playing this season, though he's had 2 straight games without any hits, so hopefully he can bounce back here and have another home run. But Devers is probably the safer play here just because he's been a little bit, he's been hitting the ball very well the last few games. He's had 4 straight hitting games and 2 multi-hit games, including home runs the last 2. Though both these guys have a lot of potential, a lot of upside, and they're priced somewhat similarly. But Justin Turner is a very good value play for Toronto as well. He has been inconsistent this season, but he's hitting the ball pretty good right now, and he definitely draws good metrics on the slate, and he's nice and cheap, so he's a good cheap overall play. For the top owned at this position, Devers, Turner, and Lewis in that order are probably the ownership situation, so definitely a good slate for third base. But there's not a lot other than the top guys at the top. For shortstop, Bo Bichette jumps off the page as one of the better plays on the slate, though he has struggled this season. He is finally starting to get some hits and score some fantasy points, though he's been really inconsistent. So, but he is back from his injuries after a rehab assignment, so I think he's in a pretty good spot here. He is priced a little higher than I'd like, but he's definitely in play. Now, David Hamilton, on the other hand, he has been phenomenal lately for the Red Sox. When he draws the start, he definitely has a lot of upside. So let's see if he gets in the starting lineup today. But if he does, then he'll be somebody I definitely want to consider, as he's nicely priced. Anthony Volpe is also in play for the Yankees. He's a good one-off for the Yankees today. He's been hitting the ball pretty well lately, though he doesn't score as much fantasy points as some other guys at the position. He's a little bit more expensive than Bichette or Hamilton, but he's definitely in play today. The top owned at this position will be Bichette, Hamilton, and Volpe, and then a low owned upside guy would be Mason Wynn. But Bichette, Correa, Volpe, and Hamilton are pretty much their top overall options for the slate. Looking at outfielders, so we're going to start with Otani, obviously, who we already talked about. But Corbin Carroll for Arizona looks like a really solid play today, though he's a little bit expensive, and he hasn't hit the ball particularly well this season, but the metrics are extremely good for him right now. He's really struggled all season long for hitting, but the metrics are solid today. He's pricey, though, so I don't really love him, but I think he's got good metrics. For Tyler O'Neill, for Boston, he's a very interesting play on the slate as he does draw home run metrics. He's been in the ball pretty well lately as well, and I think he has some nice upside. But I don't think it's necessary to pay over 4,500 or so for a batter in the outfield today, unless you go with Otani, so that you can pay up at other positions and at pitcher, because there's plenty of nice value plays for a small slate like this. It's actually really nice to have a decent chunk of value on the slate. So we're going to look at Willier Abreu for Boston. Now he is a core play for me. He's been inconsistent recently, but the metrics jump off the page today, so he's definitely worth a look. Uh, uh, Trevor Larnach for Minnesota also has absolutely fantastic metrics today. He also has been somewhat inconsistent lately, but he does draw favorable metrics here. This slate is full of guys that are kind of in that situation where they look really good today, but they have struggled lately. Kalinick is also interesting for Atlanta. He's kind of a one-off. If he's in the starting lineup for the second game, he'll be somebody I consider. Kepler's matchup metrics are really good, but his overall hitting metrics are a little bit weaker, but I do like a lot of players on Minnesota today, so he's definitely somebody to consider. But he's probably my fifth or sixth favorite on that team. Jake McCarthy from Arizona is a good one-off here for Arizona as he does draw favorable metrics and he's nicely priced. I also like Andy Pages for the Dodgers. See, as he does draw some interesting metrics. Not so much home run upside, but just good hitting metrics today. Byron Buxton, Yoshida for Boston, George Springer for Toronto, and Guerrero Jr. are also top overall plays that you could consider in that price range as well. The top ownerships here will be Otani, Corbin Carroll, Yoshida, Kalinick, and Tyler O'Neill. The other top ownerships a little bit cheaper will be Abreu, Bruxton, Kepler, Pages, and Aaron Judge. I think this is going to be an interesting slate. I do think that um, guys like Abreu and Kepler and Pages, uh, Buxton, and Larnack will all have some potential on the slate. But there's a lot of different ways you can kind of do this in the outfield today. So with a smaller slate like this, you definitely want to try to be different and so try to do different things. My core plays today are not nearly as confident as they normally are, so do keep that in mind. But I do think Jansen is probably one of the better options. I really wanted to make Torres a core play at second base as well, but I don't. It was kind of hard to decide if I should do that and whether we should even use Gill and Stone as core plays for pitchers. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And have a nice day, guys. Hey, Don, nice to see you. Hopefully you're doing well. If you have any comments,